With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
It's Heard Tell, Wednesday, January the 12th, year of our Lord 2022. So glad you're with us today. Plenty going on. M. Carpenter's going to join us, going to talk a little true crime with our lawyer friend. Going to talk a little bit about the exodus of Democratic Congress critters. Turn down the noise on that. Going to talk some COVID, going to talk some other things as well in the program, including a fun little nugget to end the show about goldfish driving. Yes, really, that's not a metaphor for your blind aunt that took the car out that's not supposed to drive. They literally let a goldfish drive. But first, let's talk about something a little more pertinent. Running theme on the show, turning down the noise of the news cycle. AP Today, new poll. Inflation up, virus down as priorities in a new poll. Heading into the crucial midterm election year, the AP says the top political concerns of Americans are shifting in ways that suggest Democrats face considerable challenges to maintain their control of Congress. A poll from the Associated Press, NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, shows that the management of the coronavirus pandemic, once an issue that strongly favored President Joe Biden and his fellow Democrats, is beginning to recede in the minds of Americans. COVID-19 is increasingly overshadowed by concerns about the economy and personal finances, particularly inflation, which are topics that could lift Republicans. Just 37% of Americans named the virus as one of their top 5 priorities for the government to work on in 2022, compared to 53% who said it was a leading priority at the same time a year ago. The economy outpaced the pandemic in the open-ended questions, with 68% of respondents mentioning it in some way as top 2022 concern. A similar percentage said that the same last year, but mentions of inflation are much higher, 14% higher this year, compared with less than 1% last year. Consumer prices jumped 6.8% for the 12-month ending in November, a nearly 4-decade high. Meanwhile, roughly twice as many Americans now mention their household finances, namely the cost of living, as a governmental priority, 24% versus 12% last year. The poll was conducted in early December when worries about the vaccine were rising. The virus, were rising as Omicron took hold across the country, but before it sparked record caseloads, overwhelming test sites and hospitals, and upended holiday travel. Still, it recently follow-up interviews with participants, including self-identified Democrats. Many say those developments didn't shake their views. And there's a nice large graphic here in the AP. COVID at 37%, the economy at 68%. The other highly ranked ones are immigration, other healthcare, meaning non-COVID healthcare issues, politics, personal finance, cost of living, gun issues, climate change in the environment, foreign policy. These are all in the 20s now. Education is at 19%, and racism and racial equality is down at 15%. That sentiment reflects the challenge for Democrats at the onset of the election year. The party won the White House and control of Congress in 2020, with pledges to manage the pandemic more competently than the Trump administration. Let's stop right here for a second. Joe Biden didn't promise to manage it more competently. He openly and braggedly said he was going to end it. That was foolish because he has very little control over it. But that's what he said. He said, we're going to crush the virus. We're going to end the virus. He used very big rhetoric about what he was going to do to the virus compared to the implied incompetence of Donald Trump, his predecessor. And now they're walking it back. That's just the reality of where we're at on this. Moving back to the piece. Administration officials acknowledge that the public is growing increasingly weary of COVID-19. Pandemic fatigue is real, and all of us feel it at some point. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy said in an interview, as a doctor, I certainly seen it with my patients over the years. When you get tired and beaten down by health problems, whether it's a personal health problem or a broader public health challenge, it can lead to disengagement. The White House says COVID-19's waning as a preeminent concern actually underscores its success in rolling out preventative measures, including vaccines. It argues the economic jitters now are exacerbated by the pandemic that will eventually ease. Still, with Democrats likely struggling to campaign on the idea that they've now defeated the virus, The other issues gaining attention among voters pose more immediate political headaches. The article continues, but we've got what we need here. Folks, the truth is, the president of the United States cannot control a virus. He can promote policies, he can set an agenda, he can lead on things, but the president never had any control over a virus. Neither did the last one. Now, both men, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, did some things for the virus and made a lot of mistakes. Both of them did. We did get the vaccines under President Trump. That's a good thing. That was good for him. He was horrific in his messaging and trying to lay out the things that need to be done public health wise. Joe Biden came into office promising to crush this virus, and his administration at best has been horrible on messaging. They can't stay on it. They don't know how to do it consistently, and they've had some obstacles. They've had two major variants in Delta and Omicron, and there's not a lot they can do about it. But the problem is when you set yourself up as being the people that are going to crush something that you have no ability to crush, you always wind up looking silly. It was their own fault. They needed the weapon and the cudgel to win the election. I understand that, and they want to lead and say, we're going to handle the virus, but they've been in office for a year now, and the results are the results. The testing situation is inexcusable. That also goes back to the last administration, but this administration hasn't done very much about it either. In fact, they've made it worse with this scheme of going through the postal service instead of just getting it in the hands of people that need it. The problem with Omicron and the problem with Delta and the problem with the coronavirus in general is there's no way to hide what you did with it. You can't wish it away. It's going to do what it wants to do, and there's not a lot we can do to stop it. We can have vaccines and things like that, but it's still a virus. It doesn't care. It doesn't have political ambitions. It doesn't have Q ratings and poll numbers. It just does what it does, which is try to replicate and mutate all it can. Our leaders, including our president, Biden, and his predecessor, Donald Trump, have to try to use these things for political means. We know that. We're all grown-ups. We're all adults. The problem is this isn't a political problem. It's causing political problems, but it's a public health issue, and it's not going to go away just because the politics say so, just because the campaign promise said so. The Biden administration is learning the hard way that these viruses don't care, and you can't control them. And you should have never said that you could to start with, or at least implied it in your wordy word trying to get office. Again, we've said it over and over again on this program. A little humility would have went a long way. I understand that doesn't play well to fundraising and numbers, but that's the truth. The administration seems to be latently learning that it needs to have some humility and say, we're all going to have to learn how to live with this thing. And that seems to be the tack they're taking. They're going to get a lot of criticism for that, and they deserve it. It's their own fault. I don't care what political party you are. Everybody could have done better with this thing. Everybody can do better going forward. And it's better for everybody to just admit that now and not try to slam it into ongoing political issues. We're going into an election year. COVID's going to be, again, a political issue. It just is. That's how the world works. But we can do better of it, and we can demand better of it. And apparently there's enough pressure on the White House and the polling numbers they're seeing to understand that they better do something about the economy, because it's still the economy, stupid, and people are shook on the economy, even while they're still dealing with COVID-19. More Heard Tell coming up right after this.
Now let me see you go off like a bomb.
Oh, welcome back to Heard Tell. We know 2022 is an election year. We know the midterms are going to be one of the dominant topics of discussion in news and politics and culture for almost all of this year, since the election will be in November, and God forbid, probably longer if we have any runoffs or anything like that. But there is a narrative forming, and it's one we need to talk about, one we need to turn down the noise on a little bit. There's a headline, this particular representative, Ed Perlmutter, who is a representative out of Colorado, becomes the 26th House Democrat to announce he will not seek re-election. Now, that number by itself sounds big. 26 of them are not going to run for re-election. There's a couple things that go into this despite the narratives. One is, yes, it is expected that unless they shoot themselves in the foot, which you can never discount because we are talking about the Republican Party here. They have an ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and they may do so, but cyclically, historically, the Republicans should have a very good year in 2022 unless they completely just have self-inflicted gunshot wounds and destroy it for themselves. Midterm elections against the sitting president, especially one with the trifecta of power, having the House, the Senate, and the White House for one party, usually don't do real well. Usually there's a correction. So it is not unusual to think that the Democratic Party is kind of battening down the hatches and understanding they're going to lose seats. This is also a redistricting year. We're going to be talking about that on the program soon. We've already talked about it with some other folks. We'll get into that at another time. Redistricting, gerrymandering, one person's redistricting is another person's gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is bad, redistricting good. It depends on which side you're on. It's a messy issue. We're going to talk about it a lot this year, but let's set that aside for just a second. There is some redistricting involved here because some of these districts are getting changed. That changes the composite, it changes the ability of these people to fundraise and run in them. Some of these representatives just don't want to fool with the hassle of running in a new district or in a redrawn district. That's understandable. Some of them have been, of course, because there are partisan politics involved, they're being drawn out of their district, quote unquote. Their district is changed from leaning one way to leaning another way, or it changes their ability to run in it. So some of that is going on. There is also, though, something that is just on a practical matter. A lot of these representatives just don't want to fool around with being in the minority. Being a member of Congress is a bit of a grind. Now, let's understand we're not talking about factory work and digging here. These are still highly pampered people that live privileged lives. However, for folks in that stratosphere who have other interests going on, unless they're planning on making a 20 or 30-year career out of Congress, if you're a couple terms or you're at the end of your term or you've been there a few years and frustrated, being in the minority is no fun. You don't have a lot of power. You're always fighting uphill. You're not getting a lot of things done. That's a major dynamic to what's going on right now. A lot of these reps, Representative Perlmutter, for example, here is 68. He probably has some other things he wants to do at this stage of his life, and he just says, heck with it. It ain't worth it. I'm going to go do something fun because this is going to be a madhouse for 2-3 years. Remember, too, our members of Congress run for reelection every 2 years, which means really they're constantly running without almost any respite at all. We were kind of joking. We talked all last year about when the Biden administration came into office, how small the window is. One of the reasons that window is so small is because the House has to run for election every 2 years, which means they're running 18 months out of those 2 years. They're seeking office or just getting settled into office. You've only got about a 6 to 9 month window where they actually legislate. We just saw this with quite clear intent in 2021, where Build Back Better struggled. The infrastructure package took almost all year. We're seeing it again with voting rights and things like this. It's hard to pass legislation in a highly polarized Congress, in a highly split Congress. And a lot of these Congress critters are just deciding it ain't worth it. They have more lucrative opportunities elsewhere, and they're throwing up their hands. So this number is going to go up. It's 26 right now. Democratic members that are not seeking reelection. They call it retiring for some weird reason. I don't really like that term, but things are changing in the Congress. It looks like the Republicans are going to have a good year in 2022, and quite a few of the Democratic friends, they just don't want to fool with it. So yes, there's an accident. Yes, there's a story there, but keep it in perspective. There's historical and cyclical forces at work here beyond just the fact that the Republicans are expected to do well in 2022. We're going to cover this story all year long. It's going to be a dominated story. We always want to keep perspective on it. We want to keep the bigger picture view of it and not just get wrapped up in the horse race aspect of it, because we'll lose our perspective on the goings on of our Congress critters up in DC. We give them a very hard time, but they do have a job to do, and we need to hold them accountable, and we need to pay attention to what they're doing. More Heard Tell right after this. Heard Tell Show, welcome back. We're thrilled to have M. Carpenter, one of our regular, with us. Usually have her on for legal news and things like that, speaking lawyery things and big words that we don't understand, and she has to explain to us. Going to have a little bit more fun because her other passion is true crime stuff. And we seem to really be in a renaissance period with true crime stuff, don't we?
Yes. Yep. It's great to be a true crime fan these days.
Some of the ones that really jump out at you, because obviously there's all kinds of documentaries on the streaming services. Everybody has their favorite podcast, things like this, but you are also an attorney. You've been a prosecutor. You've actually investigated crimes. You know more about this than the average viewer does. Which ones really jump out at you as quality true crime programs?
I I prefer podcasts mostly these days. Just fits in better with my time because I can listen while I'm cleaning or cooking, and there are a few good ones. Depends on your view of things. A lot of people don't want to have comedy mixed in with their true crime. They find it disrespectful, and that's understandable. But there are a few that are sort of funny podcasts that I enjoy. My favorite murder is one of them. Another that I enjoy is called Sinisterhood. One of the hosts of Sinisterhood is also an attorney, and she's also a stand-up comedian. Her and her co-host. So there's some comedy in there, but she's also knowledgeable, and she does a good job of explaining quirks in the law that a lot of podcasts don't have the knowledge to explain. So they just kind of skirt around them or say, "What's up with that?" or "Why is that? Why are they doing that?" Where she can explain that, but there's a little humor in there, and I like that. Another one of the first podcasts of true crime that I listened to is called Generation Y, WHY, and it's not so much funny as serious, but they're very respectful, um, and they do a good job of finding the real facts of the case and not just the media speculation. They do their own research, so I prefer those. Um, on TV, you know, Forensic Files is a longtime favorite of mine. It seems to always be on, and I always joke when I go travel somewhere, if I'm alone in a hotel room, I can turn my TV on at any time and find Forensic Files, and so that's one of my favorite go-tos. And there's some good sort of one-off mini series that come up on Netflix that are worth watching, and it really runs the gamut from complete exploitive crap to good quality shows. So I'll watch any of it, really.
Well, with that high standard in mind, but what is it about true crime? Because we've always had a fascination with it, just as human beings. Of course, with technology now, we can all kind of get a la carte whatever we want. What is it about true crime that always fascinates people so much? What is it that do you think? Obviously, you're a big fan of the genre, but when you try to discuss this with other people that maybe aren't a fan of it, what do you think it is about the human experience that they just get sucked into these true crime stories?
I think it fascinates a lot of people to realize just how terrible one person can be to another. It's outside of most of our experience to imagine the terrible things that happen to people. And so I think it's just sort of the curiosity of people who are among us, but so unlike us. Um, my true crime interest goes back to my childhood, and I remember hearing about Ted Bundy. And this was when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, because that was the early '80s, right? So, but I remember hearing about it. I don't know if my mom was talking about it or if I had read about it, because I did read newspapers and things even at that age, because was a weird child. But I recall, it's very cringy to think about now, but I remember my first grade teacher asking all of us in the class if we would, what we would do to make the world a better place. What change would we make in the world? And when it was my turn, I said, executing Ted Bundy, which was probably an odd thing for my teacher to hear out of her first grader. So my fascination goes way back. And so I don't really know what started it, other than just maybe the same thing where people enjoy scary movies, something that scares them. It's just that these are real life monsters and real life bad guys.
Yeah, talking to M. Carpenter, who is a real life attorney, but likes to stay at a Holiday Inn last night and solve crimes through her TV, like just about everybody else these days. Um, we've talked about, and it's been kind of a thing for the last, I guess 15 years or so, but Attorneys and legal experts have talked about the CSI effect, how that is affected when they go to
Right.
pool juries and things like this. That sometimes these shows can have a negative effect because they think, well, everything can be solved by DNA, or you always have a clear cut motive. These sorts of things. Do you think this is a positive or a negative? This current wave of true crime. Do you think it's improving overall knowledge of the criminal justice process, or do you think it's hurting?
I think it's improving in some ways. I do. I think that people are becoming more educated. Now, as an attorney, depending on which side of the courtroom you're on and the strength of your case, an educated jury is a good thing or a bad thing. If you have a weak case as a prosecutor, a smart jury is not a good thing for you. But the CSI effect, that's definitely real. People are waiting for that bombshell DNA testimony, the expert to come on and testify that the defendant's DNA was at the scene. And that happens quite a bit, but it doesn't happen in every case. So it can definitely be harmful. The jury has to understand that lack of DNA evidence does not mean this person is not guilty. Likewise, the presence of their DNA, depending on circumstances, doesn't necessarily mean anything. My DNA would be expected to be in my husband's car. So if he would turn up dead and they search the car, yeah, sure, they're going to find my DNA. That doesn't prove anything. So it's all in perspective. Every situation, it's up to the attorneys to do a good job of explaining that and arguing that to a jury.
Yeah, talking to Carpenter. Let's take something that really well. Some of these cases go viral. We've talked about the cases that have shown up on viral podcasts or on viral shows, and then they debate, innocence or guilt or these things. And then there's ones like you've tried to cover, like the Clarksburg VA serial killer, that doesn't seem to get any traction at all, even though it seems to be an amazing story. Talk about it from your end as a content creator, because you're also a writer. You're not just an attorney. You're a senior editor at Ordinary Times. You do great writing every week. Talk about it from that end of when you get a true crime story that needs to be told, like this VA one, and it just doesn't seem to get the traction you think it should. Talk about it from that angle.
Sure. I think there's a lot of it has to do with victimology, which is a real word used by criminologists. The type of victim has a lot to do with how much coverage a case gets. Unfortunately, we saw that, over the summer with Gabby Petito, which was contrasted beautifully on your show with Molly McCluskey, talking about the Indigenous women and Indigenous people that have gone missing and have not been covered by our media. So, and in the VA case, it was elderly men. They were, some of them probably nearing the end of their lives. And so there's sort of I don't want to say meh, but that's kind of what some people maybe don't have interest in, that because it's sort of, it's not a young, attractive person with their entire life ahead of them, that, something you don't expect to have, a life you don't expect to end so soon. So it could be part of it. And then, of course, being an angel of death is the type of killer that's a complete own category in and of itself, that is not necessarily as interesting to some people because it lacks the blood and gore. I find it very interesting, the contrast between a caregiver and the exact opposite of that, becoming a murderer. So I think that the victim has a lot to do with it. Sometimes the perpetrator, there's a lot of fascination with the typical serial killer, out on the street, stranger danger type of serial killer that is actually pretty rare despite all of the publicity that they get. Those are obviously, they get a lot of attention. I think they speak to a lot of fear that especially young women have. And women are, I believe, I'm correct in saying, the majority of true crime fans by a lot. So yeah, I think it just depends. It's the things that capture our imagination because we can relate to them. And maybe a lot of us can't relate to 80-year-old men in a veterans hospital, or we don't relate to or know much about Indigenous people. We do know, the people who look like us or the people we see every day around us in our neighborhoods and our towns. And so when something happens to someone that we relate to, I think we pay more attention.
Yeah, talking to him, Carpenter, about some true crime. We're going to get into some of those things with her as we continue on Her Tell right after this. And we're back with M. Carpenter, our legal eagle. She's usually here to talk about the Supreme Court or a past law or something like that. But today we're talking about her personal passion for true crime and the gory details, as it were. Why is it, you mentioned that women are predominantly kind of the demographic for a lot of this. Why is it? It's not just the stories, obviously. It's not just, a demographic when they develop the TV series for these things. What do you think it is? You is one, I isn't, obviously. What is it about women and the true crime genre, do you think?
I think a lot of it has to do with being protective of oneself. I think there's a feeling that if we know more about it, if we know what's out there, we can protect ourselves from it. And I think that might be part of it, for me anyway. I guess I can only speak for myself, but I always feel empowered by knowledge. The more I know, the better I feel, the safer I feel. It may be a false sense of security, but to me, knowing about these things, knowing they're out there, being aware of them, makes me feel like I can do more to keep myself safe. And I can't speak for everyone, but that's part of it for me. And part of it is just morbid fascination, as I spoke about before, just knowing what it can actually happen, the fascination of what a person is able and capable of doing to someone else that I know that I could never fathom doing. Just it's probably a combination of those things, but I think that women just want to know, well, what situations can I avoid, or what can I do to not fall prey? And there's a danger in that, because I think serial killers, for example, there's a lot of serial killers who have preyed on sex workers, and so women might think, well, I'm not a homeless, drug addicted sex worker, so I'm not in danger. So I think that's part of it, is trying to separate ourselves from the type of person who falls victim to these things. Again, that would be a false sense of security. Obviously, it can happen to anyone. So, but that's my theory on why women in particular are drawn to it.
What about the ongoing online theory / joke that all true crime watching by women, especially women that are in a relationship, is really just planning ahead and research?
No comment.
I'm sure your husband will be thrilled to know that. M. Carpenter joining us. You're somewhat outside of the system, even though you're an attorney. You've been a prosecutor. You've done these kind of cases, but you've also been a writer. You're a content creator now. You do shows like mine. What would you tell somebody that has one of these true crime stories, or they know of some kind of a true crime stories, and they want to try to get it some traction? And firsthand, because you've had to both defend and prosecute these cases where the system sometimes don't listen to folks. How would you tell them to use this new technology and use the ability of these hosts and all these online sleuths and these sorts of things to try to get their story out?
Well, I would say just to get your story out however you can. Put it on your own blog, submit it to other blogs, submit it to Ordinary-Times. We can get it out there. Social media is a big way. There are a lot of podcasters who ask for recommendations of stories they should cover, and they sometimes, some specifically, will look for lesser known stories. There's a really good podcast called The Fall Line, and it focuses on little known cases in the southeastern United States. Some in your area there, North Carolina, they've done series on. So you can tweet at your favorite podcasters or go to their web pages. They may have a submission button. You can put it in there. And especially if you've already written it up, if you've already created an article or something that the podcaster can look at and get the details of, and if you're comfortable doing so, volunteer to be their guest to talk about the case, depending on your level of knowledge. So there are several ways, and I think just using social media to your advantage and being persistent is the best way to go.
All right, I'm going to give you the time to do this because I know you've just been chomping at the bit to do it. But you have to explain to us, because some of us don't understand it, what in the world a murderino is.
Yeah, that's the first podcast I mentioned, which is called My Favorite Murder. Probably was my favorite for a long time. I even went to watch it live. But the fans of the murder of My Favorite Murder podcast are called the Murderinos. And then there are several, probably hundreds of Facebook groups of murderinos of various stripes. There's the Purderinos, there's our cat owners. There's Mountain Murderinos, West Virginia based. My Favorite Murder fans, I'm in that group as well. And my personal favorite is the Lawyerinos, of which I am a member in good standing as the legal minded or legal profession fans of the show. That's my main group. So we're just a community of true crime fans who happen to enjoy that one particular podcast.
If you were talking to somebody who was trying, just as a way to kind of wrap up our time with M. Carpenter today, what's kind of the entry drug into true crime? I know people like the detective shows on TV. You mentioned Forensic Files, which is kind of a long-standing one. What would you say the good gateway drug for folks looking to get into the genre is?
Well, I think that the true crime documentaries like Forensic Files and Cold Case, things like that, if you can get it, the old City Confidential, those were really good. They're not all necessarily serial killers. There's a lot of just small town crime that is an interesting story that you can get into. So I would start there, and then if you have a long drive or a boring cleaning or cooking chore coming up, pop one on your podcast. There's a million of them. Just pick one and go with it. I think that you can't go wrong. Throw a rock.
And that's M. Carpenter with us today on Heard Tell. Ma'am, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Back to Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Our interview with Morgan Stevens on Monday's program, and you can catch that on both the YouTube page and on all the podcasts if you want to go back and watch it in its entirety. Really struck a nerve. It's the most watched, most shared, most commented episode we've ever done. We knew it was a powerful story when we presented it, but the feedback has been amazing. We got message after message from folks responding to it with very personal things that I wish we could share, but we can't. People that really connected with Morgan's story. So by popular demand, we're going to play another clip from that show, and we want you to hear it. We want you to enjoy it. We want you to find it. This is powerful stuff. It's an important topic. Heard Tell show, Morgan Steffens on the Monday episode. Here's a quick clip from it. And then you had the real fun indignity. I know you talked about that you had been covering it at work, and then you had the indignity of going to the emergency room and having the network you work for reference that, hey, have you watched the show about COVID symptoms? Maybe this is what's wrong with you.
Yeah. I debated on whether or not I was going to include that in the piece, because being a CNN employee, I didn't want my colleagues to think that I was saying anything negative about them and their work, because really we've been doing excellent work on covering something that's unprecedented. But it was very strange because it was almost one of those moments where I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I work for this for this news network, I know that we are only going by what the experts are saying, and you're supposed to be the experts. And so it left me in this place of like, okay, now I definitely know I'm in no man's land, right? I am on an island. And that interaction kind of set the stage for what was going to unfold between me and the medical establishment, I suppose, if you want to say, the next few months.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into that with Morgan Steffens as we continue. What that medical establishment did, more importantly, what it didn't do. We're also going to talk about not just the physical effects, but the mental health effects that she struggled with. And then we're going to talk about her recent work on COVID that took her very far abroad trying to look for answers. So more with Morgan Steffens right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Continuing with Morgan Steffens, this incredible story of long COVID that she is telling from firsthand experience. You called it no man's land. That sounds like a really good way to describe it because, like you said, when the experts don't know either, I've always told people from my own health thing, there's nothing scarier than a doctor looking at you and you know they don't know what to say. That's a humbling moment in life. You went through a very long process of just kind of fending for your own and caring for your own with just you and your family. And that went on for quite a while, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It felt like it went on for about 3 months, but it felt like an eternity.
Some good news here, not to make it all negative, but the power of modern technology in amongst this, though, you did find some help. You found online community like a lot of us do. You used some social media and you found other people. This is something that has been pandemic wide for a lot of reasons, but especially for health patients, folks that were sick and shut in. We used to call them back in the day at church, right? The sick and shut ins. But this really was a lifeline to you, wasn't it?
It was absolutely a lifeline. There's 4 things that kept me alive during that time. It was my mom, my dad, my husband, and my support group. And I remember, there were times where my family, they were so devastated and kind of experiencing the trauma with me. And so they were processing it too. So having Body Politic, it's a support group that the platform is used through Slack. And so it's private, you have to be admitted to it. And so, there's different channels for different symptoms, like there's a neurological channel, there's a need to vent channel, there's a mental health channel. And so within those channels, people are kind of posting their own struggles or mentioning, hey, did you see this new study that came out? And there was not only this exchange of medical information through medical journals, recent research that had come out, but there was also something really special that took place is they actually started hosting a Zoom group. And that's really when things started to change for me, because as wonderful as it was to have that resource when I was sick early on, I didn't hop into the Zoom group until I'd say early January. And my symptoms had been pretty bad the whole month of December. And, hearing other real human voices on the other side and coming to a place essentially with strangers in such a vulnerable place in my life, the most vulnerable I think I've ever been. And immediately having them embrace me. And, a lot of these people were first waivers that were on this live Zoom group. And I'm so grateful. I mean, they had nobody, right? They had nobody telling them it's going to be okay when they were going through all of this, but they were able to tell me that. They were able to say, at one point I had shared with them that I was having some kind of scary thoughts. I shared in my piece that I had experienced some suicidal ideation, and it was really hard. For a good 2 months, it was really hard. It was a fight. And I remember sharing that with them. And immediately they started telling me, you're not alone. Early on for me, I had those thoughts. They shared their stories with me. They made me feel like, yes, I wasn't alone in it, but also they provided the sense that it was going to get better. And no one else at that time could do that. Not even my family, as pivotal as they were in my recovery, they couldn't play that role because they were in it with me. The people and the dear friends now that they are dear, dear friends, they were able to provide that for me in a time when no one else could, not my doctors, not my family, not my industry. And I will never forget that.
Yeah, and I've been pretty open with my own experiences with healthcare and how that triggered some mental health stuff with myself. I don't know that folks that haven't been chronically ill or had serious illness, just try to explain to them for a minute, because when you're sick, like really sick, like bedfast type sick, you have nothing to do but think. And you can only stare at the ceiling so much, and you can only whatever your physical ailment so much. And inevitably, with people in long-term care, we've got all the studies in the world, and COVID's probably going to prove to be the same. When you're just physically spent, your mind is susceptible. Just talk to people for a minute, because people that maybe haven't been chronically ill may not understand. I know I got to where I just couldn't stand seeing the walls anymore, and your world gets so small, it gets dangerous, doesn't it?
Yes. So setting aside the physical changes that happened in my brain, let's just talk the circumstance, right? Being sick that long and not having any answers after months, it is incredibly, incredibly isolating. It's also when you don't know if you're going to get better or if you're going to deteriorate until you can't make decisions for yourself, you go to a dark place because you start to think about quality of life. And you also, for me, I didn't want to, one, be a burden on my family if it was a situation where I was unable to care for myself, I didn't improve, and I couldn't function independently. Two, I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to not be what made me who I was. I lost my intellect. I lost my personality. I lost my ability. I had no appetite. My ability to take a walk, my ability to communicate, all of these things that bring joy to our lives, that was diminished.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. We always try to end on a lighter note or a happier note. This is a little bit of a goofy scientific note, but I think it's interesting. Quoting from the Washington Post, Israeli researchers have taught a goldfish how to drive, according to a study that offers new insights into animals' ability to navigate even when they're literally fish out of water. For the study, published in the peer-reviewed journal Behavioral Brain Research, the goldfish were trained to use a wheeled platform dubbed a fish operating vehicle. The FOV, if you will, could be driven and have its course changed in reaction to a fish's movement inside a water tank mounted on the platform. Their task was to drive, that's in air quotes, the robotic vehicle towards a target that could be observed through the walls of the fish tank. The vehicle was fitted with LiDAR, short for light detection and ranging. That's the same stuff that's on your car that does the lane detection and swerving and all that fun stuff. A remote sensing technology that uses lasers to collect data on its ground location and the fish's location within the tank. The researchers from Ben Gurion University found the fish were able to move the FOV around unfamiliar environments while reaching the target, quote, regardless of their starting point, all while avoiding dead ends and correcting locational inaccuracies. The goldfish in the tank were placed in a test arena and tasked with driving towards a target. Upon successfully hitting the target, they received a food pellet afterwards. The scientists said that after a few days of training, the fish were able to navigate past obstacles such as walls while eluding efforts to trick them with false targets. Quote, this study hints that the navigational ability is universal rather than specific to the environment. It shows that goldfish have the cognitive ability to learn a complex task in an environment completely unlike the one they have evolved in. The Israeli FOV isn't the world's first fish-driven car. Now, we all know, if you're my age or younger, from the Disney movies, that was Mr. Lipid, but I digress. In 2014, a design lab in the Netherlands mounted a fish tank on a vehicle which came with a webcam. The camera was able to follow the fish and translate their movements into directions for the go-kart. A video demonstrated the prototype showed the vehicle moving in spurts as the fish swam from one side of the tank to the other. Driving experiments have also undertaken using other animals, including rats and reportedly dogs. Navigation is a critical ability for animal survival, and the Israeli researchers say showing that a fish has the cognitive ability to navigate outside of its natural environment, quote, hints at universality in a space is represented across these environments. Driving fish, you can see the video. It's been viral. I actually first saw it on Twitter. This is up at the Washington Post. They have a in-depth little, it looks like a platform built out of an erector set with a couple wheels on it, and it has a little camera on it like you see on other autonomous things, and there's a fish in a fish tank happily swimming along, driving, which makes him better than most of the drivers in my town, but that's another Herd Tell episode for another day. And that'll do it for this episode of Herd Tell. We so greatly appreciate you watching on the YouTube, on the Facebook feed for the Big Talker FM station, listening on the podcasting platforms. The episode we did with Morgan Stevens is the highest watched, listened, and shared and responded to episode we've ever done. That was the one we did for Monday. Cannot thank you all enough. The messages, especially the private ones that I can't share, was amazing. We appreciate those responses. Make sure you're staying in touch with us. Follow us on social media. All of our guests, we always put the little lower third graphic there with their Twitter handle on there. Make sure you're following them. Seek out their stuff when they're writing or commentating. My Twitter handle is always in the intro to the segments at 4 for the Fire. The show's Twitter handle is at Herd Tell Show on the Twitter. You can also email us, herdtellshow@gmail.com. Drop us a line, ask us a question, tell us a topic you want to review us and what we talked about or what a guest talked about. We'd love to hear from you. Keep your bearing, be nice about it. We might even put it on the show and respond to you in that way. Wherever you're getting the program, if you have the option to leave a comment or a rating, that's a really big deal for us because that lets other people know our program is worth checking out. You want to do a little extra help, spend that extra click or two and share us on your social media. Every platform that you watch this on has a share option. Do that. Put us on your social media. Let people know about Herd Tell. Let them know that there is a place where we're turning down the noise and getting to good information so we can discern our times, trying to make the world a little better place, one good discussion at a time. So wherever you and yours are across the street or around the world, we hope this finds you well. We hope you're well fed. We'll talk to you tomorrow on Herd Tell.
All the music on Herd Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.